Welcome, shadow dwellers and creators, to an interview with Gert Hanekom and Karen van Vuuren, the authors of Monster Tracker. So, welcome, Karen. Hi, Gert. Well, please tell us about yourself.
My name is Gert Hanekom, joint author of this wonderful book that we're very excited about. My own background is, well, at the moment I'm a lecturer or a professor in education. But beyond that, my first love has always been literature, horror stories, everything. I can't really say much more than that. I also created the illustrations for this book, which was a process that I enjoyed a lot. One of my passions is art. Not that I'm a professional artist myself, but it was really a lot of fun to create it, but it was also a very meaningful experience, and I also learned a lot while doing it.
I'm Karen van Vuuren. I am a physiotherapist. I have been working in mental health for the last 20 years, and after hours I like to write. So that's where I come from.
We'd really like to know, where did it all begin for you? So, when did you notice a curiosity for strange uniqueness or creativity, reading, writing? I always say normal people go through life just looking forward. Creatives like us, we like to look sideways while moving forward. So where did it begin for you?
Yeah, I was very lucky that my parents saw at an early age that I had a natural love for reading, which is the basis of everything. I can still remember when I was in first grade, when we started learning how to read. Our mother tongue, our home language, by the way, is Afrikaans. But when I started learning how to read in Afrikaans, I could already speak English, and I literally taught myself how to read English by reading my dad's Asterix books. And then there were always fun books in our house. Novels for all ages, like I said, comic books such as Asterix. My dad used to take us on trips on foot to a newspaper store to get comic books, as a special treat at sometimes. And my interest in horror specifically has also kind of been there since forever. I've always been attracted to dark imagery. Not per se as a negative thing, but just as something that's interesting for me to look at. It's kind of an aesthetic thing. Perhaps maybe that's how it started. I can remember as a child, even though we were encouraged to read, we were not allowed to watch movies like The Leprechaun, which I saw streaming at the moment here in South Africa as well. I want to watch it again, but we always had to watch those on VHS tapes on the sly. Or when we visited friends with older brothers, we used to watch those kinds of things there. So there is an element of the kind of the forbidden side of it in terms of growing up in strict households that also, I think, heightened the attraction more than anything. And then from there, it kind of just naturally progressed. I started reading more sophisticated English and Afrikaans literature at a fairly young age, maybe not at such a young age as many European or North American kids do, but I've never been, I've never limited my taste, either naturally or overtly or intentionally, so I've always read a very wide variety of genres, and to my embarrassment, I only recently started reading Stephen King's horror novels. I can remember 20 years ago or so, I read The Green Mile, and I read Shawshank Redemption, the short story, and so on, but never his horror stuff. And it's only recently that I started reading books like The Shining and Doctor Sleep, which followed on that. But yeah, I think my interest in horror specifically was basically rooted in movies more than books initially, at least. So yeah, and I've always tried to write. I've I've always written poetry and short stories and things, in most cases for my own sake, just to have written something. So I'm very glad to finally see at my ripe age something that I've helped create to appear in print and in electronic form.
I think we have kind of the same starting out point, always had a love for reading. Never thought that I was going to write a book. What I was doing my master's, and I think that kind of opened up the horror side of it, but also the writing side of it, and how writing a thesis is really the same as writing a storybook. So just after I finished my master's in physiotherapy, I entered an Afrikaans poetry competition, and I won a seminar or a workshop of a day. And the lady that talked, she wrote paranormal Afrikaans stories. And as I was sitting there and she was talking about the arcs and things that happen, I realized that I really wanted to write a book. But yeah, to get it off the ground and to finish the whole story, you need motivation for that. And what's interesting is my son, although we are both Afrikaans, my son is English speaking, and he's grade 1 teacher sent me a message one day. He said he had library period and he was engrossed in this English Afrikaans mystery book. It's actually a Bloemfontein author that wrote the book, Jaco Jacobs. But he could only look at the images because he couldn't read what was going on. And that kind of sparked this thing. And I went on the internet and I looked for something available here and now that can actually that he can read and just find the wonderfulness of the mystery and the magic and the monsters. And there was nothing. I couldn't find anything. And then it sparked really this thing about, I'm going to write a book. So I call up Gert, I'm telling him, I want to write a book and it's going to be about mysteries and stuff. And he's like, yes, okay, we're writing a book. And then about 6 months passed and nothing happened. And the story idea kept going around in my head. And then Owen, my son, and his niece and the neighbor's daughter were imaginative play doing a hunt for Bigfoot. And then it kind of sparked the idea, but how can we kind of get them engaged in reading, kind of a safe way into the horror of life and mysteries? And then it really just popped out. Yeah, so that was the spark.
Can you tell us a bit more about the book itself?
I think you have a nice way of putting it, what we kind of realized after we written it.
Yeah, when Karen came to me with the idea, it was actually pretty much fully formed, the idea for the book. So from the beginning she was very clear to me. Maybe it's easier for me to actually explain this because I'm slightly more objective, so I can maybe remember things as they made sense to me. An activity book from the beginning. She said no, she wanted to do a book that has 3 themes or 3 aims, maybe would be a better way to put it. And the first is, an idea that we are all very familiar with, I'm sure most of us at least, and that is that rather than shelter our kids from the horrors of life or from the everyday monsters, if I can put it that way, we can expose them to works of literature or movies or stories, whatever you want to call it, in a safe environment. And then a very important part of this lesson is that yes, there are dark things, there are scary things, but we can face them with courage and we can prevail as well in many circumstances, most circumstances. And I think it goes through to preparing them for life in general as well. Because as we all know, there are difficulties in life that are not necessarily related to actual monsters or monsters as we see them in the movies. But they are very often symbolic of other kinds of negativity that might play an influential role in our lives. And then the second idea or theme or aim of the book, which to me personally is very, very important, is just the sense of wonder. And for us as adults to tell our children that it's okay to have this sense of wonder, of mystery and so on. And it's something, and we're actually speaking to ourselves as adults as well, never to lose that. The sense of wonder of of mysteries and the unexplained and so on, because I think that's something that caught most of us who are listening to this, anybody who's in this industry. I mean, we all remember X-Files, we all remember all those mysterious things and the unexplained and paranormal things, and I think often, some of our older family members would look at us being adults ourselves already and think, what the hell are these people thinking? Why are they still into fairy tales and mystery and fantasy and so on? But I think it's a very important part of keeping one's own creativity alive, is to retain that sense of wonder. And then the third thing was, maybe ironically in a certain sense, but the book is an activity book. And what it does is it gives the kids instructions on how to go out and find these monsters, what they need, what they need to be able to do that, the process and the method that they have to try and apply to find out more about these things, doing their research and so on. And the one of the messages there is the scientific message, So yes, it's very cool to retain a sense of wonder at mysteries and so on, but ultimately it's also an important part of life to learn to judge things based on whatever evidence it is that you can get. So it has a role to play in critical thinking as well. And we thought that this book, however small the contribution it could make in that respect would be, yes, that's part of the goal, is to help develop in a fun way that's critical thinking and the thought processes that go into investigating things and not taking things for granted.
So how much of Monster Tracker is based on mythology and how much is like research or fiction, like made up?
We actually did research on that, on what did people use, what during their investigations, what did they look at, what did they feel. But it's a lot of myth and it's a lot of legend, especially the universal one like the Loch Ness Monster or the Bigfoot, but also the counterpart of the South African one, to show also the South African readers that it's a universal thing, the mystery. But yeah, we went into a little bit of research on what if a paranormal investigator goes into a house, what do they look at, what do they feel, what are the signs and the symptoms that you need to get there. But yeah, and then maybe a little bit of what would we have liked to, if we had to go on a monster hunt, what would I look for?
Yeah, and maybe just add to that, I think it's something that we are both sensitive to, is you spoke of universality. It's something that these are ideas that I encountered long ago already, especially when I was reading the poetry of Ted Hughes and so on. The idea of recurrent archetypes, for lack of a better term, and I'm not an expert in Jungian psychology or anything, but it does make sense to me, that there is something to be said for the image of the hairy humanoid creature, which lives out there on the outskirts of your town or your settlement, and that threatens you in various ways. And how these figures, with very little differences, apart from in some details and names, how they recur throughout the world. And very interestingly, Karen told me about the South African otang or utang, which, when you think about it, it's probably just a contraction of orangutan. But we also have our own, and it's a myth that developed in the forests of the Knysna area on the east coast of South Africa. And I didn't know about this figure, and it makes sense. It's the same thing as a Bigfoot, as a Yeti, as a Sasquatch, as the Ohio grassman, whatever you want to call it, from different parts of the world. So, and there's something about the extraterrestrial aircraft, or UAPs, or as they are called these days. Ever since Mr. Grush came forward with his statements on government cover-ups in North America, but the idea of visitors from outer space, and again humanoid creatures, so these things are all related, I think, at a subconscious or an unconscious level, collective unconscious level.
And what's your favorite monster in the book?
Okay, for me it's definitely the utang. It came about as Owen had a Bigfoot phase, which he is still in, and when I read about this, it really hit the spot, I wanted to say. So I really love that one. That's my favorite.
I just want to add something to that. I remember, and I can't remember if this happened before you started on the book or before you presented the idea to me, but I remember there was a morning I had this inkling to take Owen to a botanical garden area close by, sort of public botanical gardens where they have hiking trails. And I thought of going there in the morning, and going and just doing something simple like tracing out with my finger large footprints in the dust next to some of the trails. And then later on in the day I told him, no, well, let's go to the botanical gardens and just walk around a little bit. And then obviously I led him, without him knowing it, to this footprint and so on. And this kind of also sparked a very positive reaction. The thrill of it was quite something to see. And I must just say that Owen is very much like us. He tends to like staying indoors with books and his various forms of media that he enjoys and so on. But this was an outside activity that he could get behind. That's the sense that I got. So when Karen came with this idea, I thought, man, this is something that can work for kids with lots of different interests and ways of spending their time.
And it did definitely go over to his friends, because yesterday they had this whole adventure where they went to an abandoned building and they wanted to explore. I think they wanted to go ghost hunting. They had like a salt and water spray gun going there. So that was quite something. Your favorite monster?
Oh yeah, my favorite monster from the book. If I have to choose, I will choose ghosts and hauntings, because one of my archetypal images, again for lack of a better term, is that photograph of the Brown Lady of Raynham Hall, where you see this spectral figure standing on this wooden staircase. It's kind of it was probably originally a sepia photograph from the 1800s, but you can find it anywhere on the internet, and this image really stuck with me. And then there's that famous old photograph that was supposedly taken by sailors of the ghosts of two of their shipmates who drowned a few days before, and that they could see their faces in the waves. And then there was this photograph taken of them. So those old photographs really stuck in my mind, ever since I saw them the first time. And just the idea of the remnants of someone or something that used to be alive, still being here, still being visible and so on, that idea has always struck me as very interesting and thrilling. So that's why.
I think a lot of us grew up with the legend of the ghost of Uniondale, So it is part of the South African folklore heritage. The story, quickly told, is a lady died on Easter weekend, and now everybody sees a ghost standing in front of the town if they drive by there. So, I mean, it's one of those things that just bring a little bit mystery to a town and to your imagination, and it just opens those doors, and then it can't be closed.
So what's next for you two? Right? Any more books planned? Any other plans?
Yeah, there are. I think the stories actually at this stage is kind of making me crazy. They want to be told, and I want to tell them, and I must lovingly joke and say, Gert is my make it happen man. He just kind of supports. If I tell him we are going to write a book now on mysterious places, then he will say, how do I organize the trip and what do you need from me? So maybe we'll look into that a little bit.
Yeah, I don't want to give away anything at this stage, but Karen has worked on text for 2 books that could be considered spin-offs, but we'll see how it goes. Spin-offs of Monster Trackers, but more in a prose format, rather than activity books.
Gert, I'd like to hear a little bit more about the artwork that you put into this.
Yeah, in terms of the illustrations, I by no means consider myself a professional artist, though I've always enjoyed dabbling in various different art techniques and so on. I think my primary love is drawing with white on black paper, white chalk on black paper. But the illustrations for this book, they were a lot of fun to create, and I think maybe part of the fun at this stage of my life, I enjoy a challenge. So I tried to push myself a little bit into a realm of art where I had literally no experience. And I welcomed the opportunity to do so, and I gave it a shot. It took a long time. It actually took more than a year to kind of get a tone or a vibe in my mind for the illustrations for this book. And I'm fairly happy with the way they turned out.
If there is something else coming, I think having even more visual engagement will be quite cool.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Gert. Especially thanks for coming into the office. This is actually the first in-office interview we've done here at the House of Shadows in Crystal Lake Publishing offices. It's been a pleasure. All the best of luck with your book. Everyone out there, grab a copy for your kid, your neighbor's kid, Christmas gifts. This is an excellent book for kids who have or need a bit of imagination in their life, to go out monster hunting, or a bookworm kid who just needs to get out a bit and explore, go on adventures, live life, so that they can have more to write about or create about.
Bye.
Yeah, we really hope you and your kids, or if you are a kid, that you enjoy this book a lot. And I don't want to be too derivative, but you remember John Cusack's character in the movie 1408, when he did his book release in the bookshop at the beginning of the movie, he said, "Stay scared," So I want to say, stay scared.
Stay strange.
Yes.
Until next time.